Hey, this is Oteil. If you're liking what you're hearing, head on over to patreon.com/comesatimepod and get your bus pass for an extra episode every week.
What's up? Welcome back to another episode of Comes a Time. I am Mike.
I'm Oteil. How about that last one, Mike?
Well, we just had a master's course in history with Dennis McNally, Grateful Dead historian, close personal, part of the Grateful Dead family. And we talked a lot of Kerouac and the beats in America, and it again went where it needed to go, right, Oteil?
Went everywhere. I love it. You say, I always had all these questions I wanted to ask him about Jerry.
Fuck is the point?
But this is jazz, man. We just
yeah, man.
We count it off and we start swinging.
That's it.
And it goes where it goes. And it's a beautiful thing, man.
It's so funny too, because meanwhile, before this podcast was recorded, I'm listening to 2 hours of Victor Wooten's book. And then I go into the podcast and I'm like, of course it's not going to go where I wanted it to go. It went where it was supposed to go. You know what I mean? It's just all perfect. Dennis, you're amazing. It's just the tie-in, man, the beats and I think about so much of that stuff, Cassidy was, Dean in On the Road, and then he drove the bus, and Bobby roomed with Cassidy and wrote the other one and played it the night that, Neil dies. It's just the throughput of this whole thing. It's just all ties right into every conversation we've had with all our guests.
But the first time I realized it, I was like, wow, Colonel Bruce wasn't a hippie. He was a beatnik. That was his.
Yeah.
Right. He was born in the 50s,
Yeah.
That's where his mindset was. And then the 60s happened, the hippie thing happened, and everybody was on acid. So he made perfect sense. But his orientation was pre that.
Yeah.
And now I'm starting to see that whole, it's just great.
It really is incredible.
This was an incredible conversation.
Yeah, it sure was. And his Dennis McNally, for those of you who know him as the Grateful Dead historian, he was a Kerouac historian as well. And Kerouac's my all-time favorite writer. Before I moved to Colorado, after my miserable, weary split, which is what, that's how On the Road starts, before I went west, I headed east to Lowell, Mass, and visited Kerouac's grave, and then turned and went west. So it was kind of Kerouac is a very important part of my life. So it was really an honor to talk to Dennis. Enjoy it, everyone. We're here on Osiris, home to so many great podcasts. Check them out at osirispod.com. And we would love to have you come hang out at the space station, AKA Patreon. Go to patreon.com/comesatimepod and check out everything that we're doing over there. Enjoy, stay safe, and see you next time. Peace. Which one did you have, Dennis?
Moderna.
Okay. Did you have a bad side effect to the second one?
I lost 2 days.
Yeah.
It wasn't awful. I had a friend who was the chills and the this and the that. I just was exhausted. I mean, the first day was I had the flu, and the second day I was just very tired. But
yeah, I ended up with the Pfizer, and my wife's a nurse practitioner, and people were just not showing up for their appointments, so they were throwing out doses. So they started calling friends and said, any family or friends that just if they could be down here in the next 40 minutes, they can get the shot. So I went down, and the first shot didn't bother me, but the second one,
exactly.
I had a horrible day.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
did you read about the people who got stopped by the overturned truck? This is in Oregon.
Yes.
And,
hilarious.
It was a wonderful story. This gang of people were coming back from a big, vaccination session, and they had six left, and 6 doses left, and they got stopped by a overturned truck. They were in a line of traffic that was stuck, snowdrifts and the whole thing, so they looked at each other and went, we got 6. So they get out of the car and they start knocking on cars. And some people went, wouldn't roll down the window. I mean, it was like, who are you and what are you talking about? And then one guy leaped out, ripped off his shirt, and said, take me, take me. So, and then they did the paperwork because you got to get the second shot, and
it's like traffic going into the lot. You just got doses.
you've seen the little internet meme about how do we deliver millions of doses to stadiums all over the country? Where's Bear when we need him?
Dust off the further bus.
There you go.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, man. So we've been having this idea that maybe Palo Alto is actually Terrapin. it's so many things seem to lead back to there. What comes to mind when you think about Palo Alto?
Actually, it's Palo Alto.
Excuse me.
Just FYI. One of the greatest mistakes ever was Eric Burden's song. It's a great song, actually, but that talks about warm San Francisco nights.
Yeah,
so,
really.
For those of you who've spent any time in San Francisco, we're on the ocean, and it's actually fairly chilly a lot of the time.
Right.
So when Jerry Garcia got out of the Army, there is a point to all this. When Jerry got out of the Army, which alone is a story worth the least likely person to be in the Army ever. In January of 1961, he went to Palo Alto. He had lived there in the junior high school, but the reason he went there is this kind of paradise in terms of the warmth. Nice female undergraduate students at Stanford, many of whom smuggled him into their cafeteria. I mean, he was, as he said, I was a bum. I slept on couches and was just floating along, a basic beatnik.
Yeah.
And Palo Alto, but on the other hand, it had a nice coffee house, a place called St. Michael's Alley, and a wonderful bookstore. What else do you need? Actually, coffee and good books. And he hung out in those two places, and especially the bookstore was run. It was called Kepler's. A guy named Roy Kepler, who was part of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, which was a pacifist anti-war group, which in 1961 was, a super minority, shall we say. Everybody thought that everything was cool and the American military was the best, which certainly was the strongest. And I interviewed Kepler and I asked him, here's this guy Garcia, and he's sitting in the corner playing a guitar and hanging around, but buying nothing. And he said, he added, there was something about the atmosphere. When you have live music playing in the corner, I felt I could protect him. And that was sort of Kepler's, sort of ongoing approach. And really the best part of Palo Alto, and that whole scene, this guy named Ira Sandpearl was the clerk at Kepler's, and Ira later coached Joan Baez in nonviolent theory and practice, and it really started Joan's now 60-year career as an activist. So it was a very cool scene, and Jerry was had his part in it.
We've had talks with even all the way to Ken Babbs just about like how Perry Lane and Kesey and there just seemed to be something all the way to Oteil. Were we discussing like UFO? a lot of Palo Alto seemed to just be like a magnet for the strange, but the good strange.
All the LSD and
everything.
Out of stuff happening in Stanford, the remote viewing experiments with at Stanford, Stanley Krippner. That's something I want to talk about later too.
Yeah.
The Stanleys around. You have Karma. Now let's see if I'm going to get this right. Karma was an institute at Stanford. Center. Oh, I'm not going to remember, but it's for electronic music. Did some really important stuff. There was also this guy, and I know I'm going to blow it off. I'll recommend to one and all a wonderful book about this place and time and LSD, I might add, is called What the Dormouse Said.
I have to, oh, wow.
Yeah, by a guy named John Markoff. Markoff was a New York Times reporter covering Silicon Valley for forever. And then he wrote this book, and it's about, among other things, it's about this institute, which, and when it was still legal, gave all these, short sleeved white, all those guys, those engineer types that you saw in the early moonshots, right?
Yeah.
Stacks of them with their pocket protectors and their, clip-on ties and the whole thing. He was giving them LSD, and there was a level of creativity. One of the points of the book is the basic concept of the personal computer happened in the Bay Area because, to sum it up, they were doing acid. What we call Silicon Valley could have happened on the outskirts of Boston because of MIT,
right?
But it didn't, because they're thinking, they're brilliant, but their thinking was, we're going to go work for IBM and make mainframes. And the people in the Bay Area went, well, no, why don't we put it on our desk instead of in an entire room? And the end result was Apple, actually. But and that has, those guys were part of that is the Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were part of it was called the Homebrew Computer Club, and they were like really early nerds that, as I say, sort of got over the mental thing of computers are only X, which is to say giant, and changed our world, completely changed our world.
They're thinking outside the box because they were dosed.
Because they were dosed.
It's so funny when I think about Garcia in the Army, or in like the, it's that, there's that part of On the Road where Kerouac kind of works a shift as like a night watchman.
Uh-huh.
And I think about how Garcia probably thought about that when he was, because it just seems like just such an odd pairing. Do you know what I mean?
It's a totally odd pairing. I mean, he faced the classic option, which was, he was in trouble. I don't think it was auto. I think he might have gone joyriding. It might have been, yeah, but he was in trouble.
Yeah.
And he was a screw-up. He didn't like his mother had moved him up to a place called Cazadero, and if you look, you'll see that it's a long way from anywhere. Cazadero. Yeah. It was like an hour bus ride to Sebastopol, which is like hour and a half at least north of San Francisco. So it's out in the country. He was a city kid, so the judge said, and if you ever listen to Dupree's Diamond Blues, you'll hear this dialogue. The judge said, "Son, this is going to cost you some time. The Army or jail." And Jerry said, "Where do I sign?" So he joins the Army, and of course, it's the the joke of all time is that. My father was the 20-year Army guy, and when Jerry told me that he had been assigned to the Presidio, which is the northwest corner of San Francisco, I almost fell to the floor laughing, because it's undoubtedly, in the top 2% of nicest place. If you're in the Army and you pick anywhere in the world, you'd probably pick the Presidio. I mean, the duty. You know, you're in America, and you've got all the things of America that you don't get, no matter what, elsewhere. You know, it's just ideal. And that's where they assigned Jerry. You know, he was going to see the world. You know, when you join the army, well, you know, maybe I'll see the world. That'll be good. Yeah, see the world. They moved him, approximately 2 miles from his birthplace. And he was a screw up. I mean, he was a screw up there too. And what happened was that he had a buddy who was troubled, and he was talking about suicide, whatever, you know. But his buddy needed him more than the army did, so he was constantly late for not reveille, but whatever they called it, but reporting in.
Yeah. And
eventually, and here's what I didn't understand. What he explained to me was, because it was such cushy duty, if you were a commander and you got a screw up, you didn't like give them a hard time. You just got rid of them because they were trouble, and you didn't want trouble.
Wow.
You know, life is good here. You know, we do not need screw ups. And so basically the officer said, Mr. Garcia, you don't really appear to be adjusting well to the army. How'd you like to just leave? And Jerry said, I'd like that fine, sir. And they, you know, honorable discharge, you know, just not compatible with the army. Bye.
Lucky dog.
I know, right? I think the army was lucky.
He always
too.
was kind of lucky, actually.
Yeah. A lot of people would love to have been told that. Doesn't seem like you fit in here. Would you like to go home? Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Would you like to not fight in something you don't believe in?
Like to kill someone that's very far away?
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to ask you, I mean, the thing that is so interesting to me was that, you know, your love of the beatnik literature and Jerry's love of beatnik literature kind of brought the two of you in a roundabout way together. And,
no, very directly.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, how did you initially fall into the beatnik literature yourself? Was that something that you just kind of stumbled into, or was it
kind of, sort of, and not? So I was going to graduate school, and I had a very naive idea of what graduate school in history was about. I thought we'd, you know, sit around and think heavy thoughts and you know, really learn. And I discovered that graduate school was maybe a little more sophisticated, but not very different from the training line at McDonald's. You were being trained, you know, you were being required to swallow a bunch of information and regurgitate it back, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I decided to sort of beat the system and try and among other things, pick a dissertation topic in advance. Usually you wait until the end. Right. And sort of try and control all this flood of information that I was absorbing by giving it a little focus. And literally one night about 3 a.m, this buddy of mine who's not coincidentally the guy who made me a deadhead, or in whose presence I became a deadhead. You know, he had like 20 record albums. This is 1972, okay? There were only record albums. And he had 20, of which 18 were Grateful Dead and 2 were Hatuna. So he
you didn't have a choice.
fundamental approach. And so one night, but he was also brilliant. Ended up being the dean of engineering at Washington University, which is a very prestigious place. But he was a brilliant mathematician and, you know, stone raving deadhead. And so and he liked the Beats, I might add. And one night I was saying, maybe I'll do something on the Beats. That would be interesting. And he said, no, you should do Kerouac. His papers are at Columbia, and you can stay with my friends in the Bronx. And when you're a broke graduate student and somebody says, and I can put you up on the subway system in Manhattan or in New York.
Perfect.
That's real. And ironically, or not coincident, or perhaps coincidentally, but conveniently, just around then, my parents had moved 20 miles from where Kerouac grew up in Lowell. So I suddenly went, the universe seems to be telling me something. And nobody had written a book about Kerouac at the time. And whatever I did for my dissertation, I wanted it to be a published book and not just an academic thing. Um, so I started, and long story short, I did it and I finished it and I published it in 1979. And I sent a copy but in the interval, as I said, I've been around this guy, Chris. I was a deadhead. And I said, there are all these connections between Kerouac and the Beats and the Grateful Dead, even more than I even dreamed of, as I found out when I finally got a chance to talk with Jerry about it. When he was 16, he was going to art school at the San Francisco Art Institute in near North Beach. It's on the edge of North Beach, which was the sort of beat neighborhood. This is like 1958, okay? He's 16. On the Road is a bestseller. I mean, it's a current bestseller. And his teacher was a guy named Wally Hedrick, who was in fact a real part of the beat scene at the Art Institute, the sort of second generation of beats, a little younger than Kerouac and Ginsberg, but very much into the idea that art and spirit, love and spirit and art are more important than making money. And one day, his buddy said, what's this beat thing to Wally? And Wally said, you guys are beat. Go down to City Lights, get this book on the road. It's about you. And he did. And one of the great questions I never asked was, did you buy it or did you heist it? Because he was a street kid. The 5-finger discount was not unknown to him. Anyway, he did read it, and it was the blueprint for the rest of his life. And he'd tell you that. Yeah. It was how you lived and how you acted, and what was important. And it was and that stayed important to him until 1995. When he died, he was making a lot of money. He was also waiting for his next paycheck, because he figured if you spend just a little more than you have, then it doesn't have any control over you, and you're okay. So, like I said, I sent a copy to him and a copy to Hunter through the Deadhead post office box, box 1070, either 1065 or 1073. We had both of them, and now I can't remember. Yeah. But anyway, that's as much as I knew. I didn't know anybody. I had no connections. I just sent him this book. Long story short, wrote an article about the Grateful Dead for the Chronicle, about New Year's Eve, the New Year's Eve ritual. And it came out, and I met Jerry, and because it wasn't supposed to be the topic of conversation, but I sort of gently slid into the conversation that I had written this book about Kerouac. And he got real excited and said, oh, you're the guy that did the Kerouac biography, and said really nice things about it. And about 3 months later, he sent a couple of guys who worked for him, Rock Scully and Alan Trist. We met at the Warfield. This was after the Grateful Dead had done their 15-night run. And it was actually the second Dylan run. And they said, Jerry says, why don't you do us? Why don't you write a book about the Grateful Dead? And of course, I'd been dying to do that for 7 years. And I sort of went, I maintained my cool. I said, let me give that some thought. And then I proceeded to go home and get really shit-faced.
I'll think about it.
But anyway, yeah. So, I got my gold ring.
That's amazing. That's so
I grabbed
great.
it. He shoved it into my hand.
It's always amazing when the person that you love. I worship Jerry Garcia with everything I have, and I listen to your Jerry on Jerry audiobooks, and to learn how much Jerry loved the Beats. And at that age, at 16, I had a job at a car wash not too far from Yale University. Did I ever tell you about this, Oteil? My job was to empty the trash cans. It was a hard left turn across 4 lanes to get into the car wash, so no one ever came to get their car washed. So I would just smoke joints and listen to the Yankees on an AM radio. And this guy pulled in like a little hatchback. He looked like Darwin. He had like a big old beard, and he put like 3 big black trash bags into the trash bins and then pulled away. And it was my job to empty the trash. And I went over and emptied there were 3 bags of books from Yale, like Yale School of Drama, Yale School of Psychology, Yale School. They were all stamped Yale. I laid the books out, and there was everything. I mean, you name it, from, Norse literature, like Norse tales, to Jack London, to all the way up, Lewis Carroll. And On the Road, Kerouac, that was the first book I picked up ever in my life and read cover to cover at that car wash, and it completely changed everything. That was like, this is it. I love this book. I love this lifestyle.
And the way to encounter it. I can't even remember how I met the book. It was in high school. I heard about it and I read it and I went, and I had, when I was 13, when I was 4, my father and I drove across country for the first time. And I remember bits of that. And then when I was 13, we went back the other way, with my sister. And so I had that. Everybody should drive across the country at least once. And I mean, drive. No, flying doesn't count. Trains are okay. But the point being that, it's amazing. I mean, leaving aside the sociology of what's going on in the book and the music, if you just go through and make a list of all the songs mentioned in the book, you have this amazing slice of American music in that era, in the late 40s, when you've got bop and R&B and just black music is like exploding. With quality, the quality of it is just phenomenal. But just getting a sense of what an amazing it's a good continent there, North America, and driving across it is quite amazing.
Yeah. So apple pie and ice cream along the way.
A lot of apple pie and ice cream. Well, it's going to be good. It's nutritious. On the Road is like a really important book, and that's sort of the way I approached it. I'm in the history department, was that a long time ago? But I was approaching it from history, not literature, so that what I was impressed by and interested in was the impact that On the Road comes out in the fall of '57, and just suffice it to say that. Most of us have probably seen one of those 50 sitcoms like Father Knows Best or Leave It to Beaver. Well, in 1957, people believed that was reality. I mean, that was sort of the consensus reality of America, was that, fathers were kindly and mothers wore frilly aprons and stayed at home, and there weren't any black people and there weren't any gay people and there wasn't any abuse and blah, blah, blah. And that was reality. And On the Road was this polite, I mean, it was just a book, but it was a rock thrown through the window of this delusion that America was living. And Janis Joplin's there in Port Arthur, Texas, and she hears about On the Road, and she sticks out her thumb and heads for San Francisco. And all Jerry had to do was take the 14 bus into downtown from his home, which was in the southern part of San Francisco. Dylan being Dylan, read weirder stuff than On the Road. I imagine he read On the Road, but he found some real. When they interviewed him, it was like the things he mentioned about Kerouac were like, "You read that? How the hell did you find that?" I mean, there were 5 copies printed, but that's Dylan,
Totally.
And David Bowie is reading William Burroughs, and all that stuff. It was a game changer.
It really was. I remember one of my favorites. See, I read On the Road at multiple points in my life. I feel like, you know, it's a book you can go back to and kind of like an album and be like, what does it mean to me now?
Yeah.
You know? And I remember that probably one of the most pivotal scenes in the book to me in my mind was his first trip out west, when Kerouac wakes up in like a railroad room and looks at the light on the ceiling, and he thinks about the east of his youth and the west of his future, and he didn't know who he was. For a brief moment, he had no idea who he was. And it's like, that's to me, that's what we're all looking for. You know, the past is depression and the future's anxiety. Just be in the moment and not know who you are. It's a beautiful, beautiful, he had a way of just capturing loneliness in such a romantic way.
When he started writing On the Road, he estimated that he'd already written 1 million words. I mean, he'd been writing compulsively since high school.
Yeah.
By now, he's quite late 20s. You know, he'd written this fairly conventional first book called The Town and the City. Yep. And he had, you know, it got published, which, believe me, is triumph when you're trying to break in as a writer, as a fiction writer. And but it wasn't good enough for him. And he wanted, based largely on jazz and on the principle of improvisation, he wanted to take it much, much further. And through various influences, he found a voice, a new voice. And it was a voice that could not be published. And see, that's the impressive thing, is that he kind of committed suicide to write and assume that it's not going to be published, because the writing establishment in 1951, which is when he wrote On the Road, was as tight-assed and as rigid and as concerned with form and not content, right, as possible. And he you know, pressed on. And for the next 5 years, he wrote book after book, none of which would ever, you know, see the light of day, except that he finally got lucky and he found the right editor and with the right clout, got On the Road published, and then he got the review of a lifetime from the New York Times, again, accidentally. The best, in some ways, the best story that I had no clue of when I wrote about Kerouac was that, and remember, this is like 1973 or 4, and so not even remotely anything called an internet. And I'm watching television, and I knew that the guy who had written this review, which compared it to Hemingway as a generational document, you know, it was as good. It was the review of a lifetime. And his name was Gilbert Milstein. And you know, how do I find Gilbert Milstein? Well, son of a gun, I'm watching the TV news. I think it was ABC, but I wouldn't quote me. And I'm reading the credits, and there's Gilbert Milstein. And I'm going, well, it's got to be him. And so the next day I call, and yeah, in a minute I'm talking to Gilbert Milstein. Just cold call the main number at ABC News. And he's an editor. You know, I get to him, he answers the phone, and yeah, sure, I'll talk to you. So the next time I go to New York, I go in and talk to him. And it turned out that he was like the second string reviewer. The main reviewer was a man named Orville Prescott, whose nickname was Prissy. If he'd done On the Road, rest assured you'd never have heard of it. But he was going on vacation, so he didn't object, and he let Gilbert take it. And the rest is history.
Amazing.
Another great gift.
Yeah, yeah. Nothing happens by accident.
I don't think so.
Yeah. That's one of those ones where you go, you know, where you hear Twilight Zone, you know, theme music in the faint background and going, well, you know.
Yeah. But it was such a huge thing to like burst everybody's bubble. You know, I think that's one of the failings of American society is that bubble. You know what I mean? The pandemic has kind of done the same thing, like pulled back the curtain on where everybody thought, oh, let's get back to normal. It's like normal was totally messed up.
Yes, really. You know? No, the there's 4 or 5. What I'm working on now is about the roots of the whole '60s hippie so-called phenomenon. And but going back a little further, then every book that talks about the Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco starts in 1965 with the charlatans. Mm. Which is understandable, but it's like, couldn't you like try and give it a little more context? And that's what this is about. And that context is about challenging 4 or 5 what I would say are delusions, like, for instance, what they call American exceptionalism, which is that America is uniquely virtuous. It's always, everything it's done has always been positive, and it's like, does the expression 60% of a human being mean anything to you? That's called the United States Constitution. That's what the South got in electoral votes for the slaves.
Yeah.
This is not a uniquely virtuous country. It's rested on a lie. It rests on a lie, and that's what the '60s was about. Was, among other things, with the example of the Freedom Riders of saying, let's be honest, and that was really one of the most shocking things I've experienced in the last 5 years, and with what we've just gone through, you could make a long list. Yeah. But one of them was when Trump announced that diversity programs were banned, and that the party line was that America is perfect and criticism is not permitted, and they eliminated the 1619 Project from the New York, which the New York Times did with, serious resources to, really trace the impact of slavery on every aspect of American culture. And here's the president of the United States saying, no. We're not going to have any of this criticism. That's unacceptable. That's un-American. It's like, yeah, right. Well, so anyway, that is what Kerouac, and then and just before him, and just at this time, Allen Ginsberg's poem "How" did, which was basically stand up and say, "Look, the emperor is naked.
Yeah, man.
Already, there's no clothes here.
Yeah.
And there's a great line that Allen wrote. I think it's in another poem, and it's, "America, I'm putting my queer shoulder to the wheel," which is to say, he recognized that there was a lot of positive stuff in America, speaking as the child of immigrants and all that, and there was room there for them to rise. But you can't, you'll pardon the expression, whitewash it. You can't simply say that it's all, it's all perfect.
No, when I think about the Beaver Cleaver version of America, I was like, it's like that's what everybody was buying to. I'm like, only white people were buying into that. My dad used to watch, there'd be Mayberry on, and he'd just be passing through the room, be like, "There ain't no black people in Mayberry. Who's doing all the work?" And then he'd just go pass through. We're like, "Dad, can we just watch?"
Well, that's, but that's a good thing to keep in mind. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
They were very consciously. This was a sitcom, and it poked gentle fun, and what's his face, the cop,
Barney Fife.
Barney,
yeah, Don Knotts.
With a but it's dangerous. I mean, it's just downright dangerous when you start thinking that those situations and those values are reality. There was a lot of that going on. And
that's why I remember when Norman Lear started having all his sitcoms, and it was like just doing stuff like he had the first toilet flush with Archie Bunker. Like people didn't go to the bathroom.
That's right.
Apparently in the 50s. It's like, or it was just something that for him to be able to get away with like attacking those things like head on.
Yeah, totally.
You could tell that the impact that the 60s had made already to pave the way, and the beats before that to pave the way for something like that to happen.
Absolutely. No, a great deal, Archie Bunker was a very interesting program. It had hit in the spring of 71. And that summer, I went to Paris to practically try and learn enough French to pass the language exam in graduate school that fall. And I ran into this wonderful couple. The guy had just spent 2 years. He was American, but he just spent 2 years as the art director of the press in Tanzania, which was officially socialist. A guy named Julius Nyerere, and so he was kind of cutting edge, both as an artist and as a political thinker. And we got to talking about and. In 1971, you weren't picking up American TV shows in Tanzania. The web, again, the web and in world television didn't exist. Mm. And when the one thing that every American, black, white, left wing, right wing, did when you were an exile or an expat was read Time magazine. So he had kept up with America in Time magazine, and he read about Archie Bunker, but he said, so tell me about this Archie Bunker thing. I can't get enough out of Time magazine to really get it. So I started, explaining, and his eyes just got really, he was like,
yeah,
it's not the country I left 2 years ago. I said, no, there's been some changes.
That was I watched that with my grandfather, with my uncles, and what an incredible show. To this day, it's just so...
Well, it was the
so
culture, the culture divide, and my father was reasonably decent, among other things, about politics and civil rights and so forth and so on. But on the other hand, he had great limits, and the arguments between Meathead and Archie, they got replicated at my house. And I remember this huge fight with him about Muhammad Ali's right to change his name. Mm-hmm. And I just looked at him and I said, everybody should be able to be called what they want to be called. If you're not doing it for fraudulent reasons, how can you object? Well, I don't know about it. And usually my father did not degenerate into the, it's just not right thing. He was intellectually, at least he could present an argument, but it was
right for black people to have their complete family names obliterated.
Right,
right. Like I found out we're from Nigeria.
Yeah.
Like what, 7 years ago, or more, maybe a little bit more.
Even worse
just now, late in life, finding out where we come from.
Even worse in some cases to have the name of a slave owner as a last
name.
Well,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like, I don't want to keep, I never give anybody a hard time. It's funny. That's how I got my name and all my siblings, because my dad's name was William Leslie Burbridge, and my mom's name was Carol Orville Smith, like the most white bread beaver cleaver names you could, proper British.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of black people were changing their names back then, which they never had any argument against, but they didn't do it. But they gave each of us an African name, except for my sister Leilani. I'm sure if I changed my name from Burbridge, they'd be like, hey, if I wanted to let go of the slave name, they'd be like, do what you want, So I never begrudge that when somebody like, oh man, that's Donnie Jenkins, man. Don't pay no attention to that. It's like, no, man, if he wants to let that name go.
Right.
That's their right. I mean, that's a uniquely American. What about American freedom, Dad? There's freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech. Well, I did a book on what white people got out of black music. It's called On Highway 61. And one of the things I
Everything? It's
It's a long book, huh?
It's one word. Everything.
Or contrarily, somebody asked me, so what about the American music that isn't affected by black people? I said, you mean both CDs? No, I mean,
It's true.
among other things, whether you don't have to be a scholar to know that in the 1740s there was the United States and the colonies were swept by something called the Great Revival, which was a religious revivals that went up and down the East Coast, and in the South they weren't in it. Obviously, they weren't integrated, but they did let the slaves mostly in to the balcony, right? The old story. And the point being that their singing completely changed American church singing, Protestant, hymn singing permanently from then. So, and since pretty much all music in America starts in the church, one church or another, it's all black. And
or in the field. That's where you get the church blues divide.
There you go. Well, there's that too. But anyway, but what I was going to say was, when I did that, it occurred to me, and I sort of went back and I decided there were kind of two freedom. The United States has always talked about freedom. We're the land of the home of the brave, land of the free. Yeah. And I said there's kind of two kinds of freedom. Most obviously, there's the kind of intellectual freedom that, say, Thoreau displayed, where he, his thinking was so amazing that it was 100 years before people even caught up to him. And right. I don't joke about that. I got completely crazy about Thoreau when I was researching this. And
we'll do another podcast.
Yeah, we could. You could cover a lot.
I'm with
of
you on that.
Talking about Thoreau. And I said, but and that was a very small group of people that were that intellectually open to, reject Christianity, reject American exceptionalism, reject the way we treated nature, and relate to it as something that we're part of and not
we don't own.
Can rape. That's one, and that's pretty minority. And then there's the freedom to make as much money as humanly possible, which America's always been very good at, for another minority of winners. And that's
Nietzsche's got this quote. Yeah, that this quote that has been sticking with me, that sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusion destroyed. I mean, when you look at it now, like just like that answer from your dad, when it's like that grunt of an answer, which I think we're all having now when we have these conversations with certain people in our circles, you get this like, I feel like that translates like, I don't know why I'm uncomfortable with it, but I'm uncomfortable with it, and I don't want to know why, like, and it's kind of like this, almost like it's easier not to, think.
Well, there's so many things wrapped up together. Like,
yeah.
If you when I criticize America, like if I'm going to go hard, I like to distinguish, because there's three Americas I think that we're talking about. We're talking about the land itself, which you've mentioned, like how amazing it is. Like you should go drive across it and see it. Right. And there's the people, which I think 2/3 of are good with me, and I'm good with them. And then there's the government, which I'm like, like so when I criticize, like, let's just talk about. But see, when you say something like, "Do you change your name?" Like when I say I'm against the war, I'm not saying I'm against the people in the military. Those are probably poor people, a lot of whom are black, that went in because they've got into trouble like Jerry, or they didn't have a better option. I'm talking about the people that send them to war. So now we're back at the government, right?
And the companies that pay for the war.
Yeah, but if I say this to the people that send them to war, they're saying, "Oh, you're doing that to the military." I'm like, no. Not that I'm I'm not saying that. I support them. Those are my brothers and sisters that are going there, get their asses shot off or killed for the wrong reasons, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's I think it's good that, I hate to say it's good the pandemic happened. And I hope people don't like quote tweet me or whatever, you know. But the good part about it is that the pandemic has peeled that back. I had a lot of people write me on my Instagram, you know, when the George Floyd thing happened, like, finally, you know, we could talk about this. And I just started firing. People were like, whoa, Teal, when did you get so like, whatever? I was like, yeah. And I was like, well, you know, forever it was just like, don't talk about politics. Don't talk about religion. I'm like, okay, you know, this is just, here's my gigs. Here's pictures of my, you know, kid digging a hole.
Yeah.
You know, but then it's like, okay, if we're really going to talk about it, let's talk. Finally, it just shocked a lot of people, and I'm just like, you know, some of us haven't been living in this bubble. We've been on the outside of the bubble. You know, even though I've got to go back and forth between the two worlds, you know, since I was very young. You know, if you still come from the outside of the bubble, that's your orientation. You know, I haven't lost that like preference for how the poor are going to do or whatever, you know, in politics.
Absolutely. But yeah, it's, I don't know why I started, maybe just because I was little as a kid, but I just always wondered, understood the principle of equality, the implications of equality, and the, you know, the Bill of Rights, and all that stuff, and worked from that. And you can't, as you say, that looking at it now, my father's unwillingness to confront Ali's decision to change his name was the classic sort of white liberal, well, you know, look, I want him to have his rights, but not too many, or something, you know, and they're not willing to. And one of the things, as you say, the positive side of the pandemic, in particular of Black Lives Matter, was watching people have hard conversations, and you know, that idea, you know, oh, we don't have institutional racism. Oh, really? You know, and
Colin Kaepernick,
prisons.
Start with Colin.
Well, I mean, just even Colin Kaepernick, all he did was
knee.
Take a knee and start a national uproar.
And you know, just the idea that if you're not with me, you're against me. Is well, no, you know, can't we be a little more subtle than that?
You know, and even like you look at like that when Kerouac was asked like, what does it mean to be a beat? And he just, in one word, sighing, just says sympathetic. And that was like and I thought about that as like all right, like that's what it means, like just to be open and vulnerable and admit you don't know everything and kind of be okay with learning, you know,
empathy.
Yeah. No, and I'm very involved with Zen Buddhism, and the guy who founded it in America, Suzuki Roshi, talks about beginner's mind, that you're open, that beginner's mind, you know, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities and solutions. And in the expert's mind, there's only, you know, the one that you've already concluded. And the interesting thing about Kerouac was that the critics associated him, there were only, in the mid 50s, this, you know, the cultural apparatus said, you know, everything's fine, right? You know, we're prosperous, you know, no war, all good.
War's over.
You know, we Black people were, you know, oh, they're fine. They're fine. They're, you know, everything's getting better. The only other deviants other than the Beats were the juvenile delinquents. That's the only ones they would recognize as, yeah, we do have a problem with this, with some of these juvenile delinquents who are, of course, are violent. So they started lumping the beats in with them and implying that they were all violent. Kerouac, was as nonviolent as you can imagine. There is no violence in On the Road. Where was this coming from? Well, it was coming from because, again, the only other people that were sort of acknowledged as existing, heavens, leaving aside gay people,
gays,
and Native American, everybody that isn't white, and et cetera, and women, and blah blah blah. So, and there's Kerouac who just, and if ever there was a person, Otil, I mean, you have experienced legitimately. I've experienced it as a matter of reflection, which is to say, I'm a little bit famous, quote unquote, in this weird little world of the Grateful Dead, which isn't so little, as a couple million people. And I'm famous in the sense that there are people who know who I am if they see me, and I don't know who they are, which is okay with me. With me, it's a reflection because frankly, I am not famous in that sense. I worked for somebody who is famous, and I'm as close to him as they're going to get. So, people, oh, I'm very excited to meet you. It's like, well, don't be. I mean, just say hi. You've earned it. I mean, you're a consummate artist, and so when people come up to you, they have an image of who you are. It may or may not have any connection other than the fact that you play bass. It may not have any connection to who you are. Kerouac, if anybody was ever not equipped to deal with fame, which is to say, not equipped to have people make assumptions about him that, in fact, were not true, it was him. And that's why, that wonderful review catapulted him into fame and to having some money. And it killed him. I mean, because his only defense was a bottle of Johnny Walker. Now, instead of a little wine, he's drinking, fifths of scotch.
At his mother's house. Yeah.
At his mom's house. And, 10 years later, he's managed to drink himself to death.
Not too different from Jerry.
No. Well, who is equipped for fame?
Well, there's that.
I mean, literally,
there's that incredible quote that Barlow was talking to Garcia about Weir. And he goes, I don't know if Bob's fit for, like the fame. And Jerry goes, who is? No one is.
Nobody. I mean, I can try to name people that fame didn't either drive crazy, even if they got over it, or kill. Like there's Dolly Parton and
Neil Young, maybe. Yeah, who knows?
Neil Young?
No, I know, I'm just being sarcastic.
Yeah, I'm like, I got to start trying to think,
Well, Neil took one look at fame and pivoted and just.
Yep. Love it.
Applied serious controls to all the manifestations of it in his life. So that, he, in a sense, as a slightly strange guy, he at least could see it coming. And
figured it out.
But Jerry managed to hold it off for a long, long time. But, to me, I mean, in particular, I've had a running argument with Mickey about I sort of, on some weird level, not blame it, but attribute much of his, last few years to Brent's death and to the fact that, and it's not like Jerry took personal responsibility for Brent had some character blind spots that obviously came from his childhood. I mean, it wasn't as though the Grateful Dead just, corrupted this nice young man and ate him alive, spit him out, and there he goes. But it was being part of the Grateful Dead was you see it amongst the survivors amongst Mickey and Billy and Bobby, just in whatever it is, however, they relate. They've managed to survive, but they've got scars from the life, and when you can't leave your hotel, the best.
Right.
Let me put it this way: the best single thing I ever did for the Grateful Dead was I made arrangements. There was this amazing touring show of Monet, where there were like 5 or 7 things that he painted over and over and over again, but at different times of day, different seasons, so forth and so on. And so there were like 5, like a haystack and the bridge and whatnot, 10 versions of each view. And I got the Grateful Dead an hour alone with this art show. And, Jerry hadn't been able to go into a museum in years. And they loved, it was wonderful to just be able to go look at wonderful art and not be bothered.
Jeez.
It's something I always talk about. So sorry to our Comes a Time viewers that I'm going back over it again, but it keeps coming up. It's something out of the Bible, the concept of idolatry. And it's one of the most important and most true ones because it's so toxic for if it's put onto a person.
Yeah.
Right? It's equally as bad for the person doing the worshiping as the person being worshipped. That kind of thing is only supposed to be for the ineffable, the divine, the bigger than
and you can apply that to the music, but keep that. And Jerry was very clear that there's the music over here, and what we being the band and the audience and the whole thing creates, which is magical. And me, who, to quote him, all I'm doing, man, is trying to stay in tune. He did not. He did not take himself too seriously. But you get tired when people. There was somebody arranged. It was kind of like a Make-A-Wish thing of a guy, and was going to get to meet Jerry. And he was in a wheelchair, and very nice young man, but he was like hyperventilating, right? Oh God, Jerry's coming. And I looked at him, and I was very proud of myself after, because it got through. I looked at him, I said, listen, I got to tell you a secret. His eyes are like big. And I said, Jerry farts. And he cracked up, and I said, and he snores, and and blah, 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 blah. And if he walks in and you're like as excited as you are right now, he's going to be very uncomfortable. He's just a person. And he went, yeah, I understand. And did in fact calm down, and they had a nice chat.
It's great. People do the craziest. Oh. I swear, God knows I do not want to be famous. I'm just a little bit more famous than I'd like to be. If you could be like Elton John's lyricist, that's the guy.
That's the idea. Nobody knows what he looks like, right?
Yeah. Well, that's why Bob Hunter was such a cool,
You could go to the grocery store. You could do whatever you got to do.
All that. Hunter added on. Yes, he was less, certainly less visibly known to Deadheads than anybody. But on the other hand, he also, at his funeral, the guy who had booked him when he was doing, when he was touring, told a story about that every year, Hardly Strictly Bluegrass, which is this wonderful free,
I love them,
gigantic event in Golden Gate Park. A local, very wealthy guy, pays for it, and his estate, he's passed, pays for it. And every year they would offer Hunter what Steve, his agent, called stupid money, to come down and do a 45-minute set. And Hunter said, so, what do you think this is going to be? And he said, well, you're going to drive down to Golden Gate Park, park backstage, have a bite, go on stage, play for 45 minutes, go home, and you're going to have enough money to put an addition on your house. And Hunter said, but more people will know what I look like and recognize me. And he said, you don't leave your house. How can they find you? So that was his solution. And I might add, it was hardly Strictly Bluegrass. So,
well, that was, I love that quote that in the other one too, in the Netflix documentary with Bob, where he talked about how, they wanted to be successful, but on their terms and sidestep fame. I love that concept. As a comic, I'd see these comics who to me were, if I'm working the club in the West Village and when they walk into the room, the comedy fans are like, oh my God, that's Brian Regan, or that's, Bill Burr or whoever. And then they walk out into the street and walk down the street and they just kind of blend back into the, just the faceless New York night. And it's kind of, there's a little bit of jazz still in that world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's great artistic accomplishment, but with very few exceptions, not what you'd call fame beyond a very, narrow slice. Through the 70s, that was pretty much true with the members of the Grateful Dead. In the early 70s, Jerry Garcia said that he made $125 a week. Okay, that's $6,000 a year. Now you could live on that in 1971.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you were not the Beatles. You were not Mick Jagger. You were, just
cigarette money for him.
It was cigarette money, and maybe there was enough. I mean, that boy went through a lot of cigarettes. But so it was a healthy situation for a long, long time where they had enough. They could play, as much as he could play as much as he wanted. And, by the early 70s, he was playing in 3 bands. And,
happy, yeah.
His idea of perfect was about 4 nights a week, every week, and just a couple of nights off to, recharge. So, but it was about playing and being able to play on your own terms. And they had that. And then by the 80s, I think basically what happened was you've got the Reagan era, which is, and greed is good and that sort of mentality. And then this slice of the population that says, no, I don't think so. And becomes deadheads because it's sort of the last adventure to go out on the road and follow a band around. And then unfortunately it just built and built and built.
That's like MTV. Then MTV happened and greed is good. And Reagan said, no, we're coming for you.
All that.
It's like old battle.
And then there's the thing that the Deadheads paved, and then 95 hits and Jerry, passes, and then, Fish and some of these other bands kind of carried it. And that's where I was 15 when Jerry died. And I started, religiously following Fish around the country after reading On the Road and studying, but like Paul Grushkin's book on Deadheads, and it totally, it felt right, and it felt like, okay, well, we're carrying that torch, or the ball was passed, or whatever it may be, and then this festival world blows up. It seems like, the intrepid are always going to find a way to create a little space. Oteil and I always talk about how the lot was right, Oteil, what do you say? Like the lot is the lot.
And when the pandemic hit, I said, everybody's going to be on Shakedown Street now, because everything's
making your own clothes.
Yeah, you're just going to have to make your own way. And I thought, Deadheads are uniquely prepared for like an after the end of the world scenario.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's certain flexibility and willingness to stick your neck out. I got to say, after Comes a Time, and pardon me, Fare Thee Well. This is Comes a Time. There was also one for Jerry at the 10-year anniversary. But in 2015 with Fare Thee Well, I thought that deadheadism would sort of dwindle away because everything dwindles away in this world.
Yeah.
There may be one major exception to that, and that is deadheads. And what I realized 6 months later was, in fact, it just reignited everything. Until now, it's 2021. There are more deadheads than there were in 1995, which is ridiculous. I mean, it's just.
Yeah.
And I mean, you start with Dead and Company, which is sort of a, the sort of the most obvious thing. I mean, for Bob Weir to still be playing stadiums, as he hits 70 and beyond, is like saying, what? My the local rock critic talked about, you'll like this, going to see Dead and Company at Shoreline, and we're back to Palo Alto, but going to see Dead and Company at Shoreline, and watching the audience respond to John Mayer, and he got stuck in sort of a time loop, and there's John Mayer and Deadheads in front of him or in between them, the audience. And all he could think of was seeing John Mayer 7, 8, 10 years before, when the audience was all 13-year-old girls. And it was like, and Mayer was like superb in both contexts, but the contexts were so contrasting that he could barely process it. But the thing is that in addition to the big dog of Dead and Company, there's like 5 Dead cover bands in every town in America.
Yeah.
And it's its own language.
But there has been that for a long time already, right?
Yeah.
But it's
I mean, it's like more underground.
More, yeah. And
they're making a lot more money now.
Yeah. And what's amazing now, as much as I can't stand social media, one of the amazing things about it is you could see a 12-year-old prodigy in his parents' basement playing a Help on the Way, masterfully.
Man, I'm about to bust out one on people. This kid, Jaden Liebman, that lives here, he came to me for a lesson. I was like, man, I mean, maybe you want to study with my guitar player, Tom Guarna, who I study with, but do you want to play with me? Like, we started playing together, and we played Birdsong, and this kid is playing like Birdsong is just, it's slow. There's like one chord. You got to play. You got to make something, and there's so much space for you to fail.
Yep.
And he just was like amazing. I was like, man, I got to start playing with this kid. So I love it that you could see it going on.
There's so many advents to there's so many fill in the blank Dead. Like I was saying, I think when Krasno was on the podcast, Dennis, I went to Denver and I saw a band called Steely Dead. And it was Steely Dan, Grateful Dead hybrid. That's all they played. And it was the segues in and out were just unreal, how they would be able to, go from a Bertha to a Bodhisattva back into a, and it's just so beautiful the way it was done.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I know a band called Uncle Dwayne's band, which was Dead and Almonds. And there's a band that was at they're supposed to be, I guess, and will be next year. And hopefully so will you, at Skull and Roses in Ventura, a band called Pink Talking Fish.
Yes, they're fantastic.
Pink Floyd, Talking Heads, Fish, and the Dead.
Yep. Yeah, no,
I love the bluegrass Dead stuff and the reggae. Remember, was it Peter Rowan? They did I saw him at Suwannee. There's like this whole, it was Deb as all reggae.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's so good, man.
Absolutely. Really, and I've just gone blank. Roosevelt Collier. Do you know Roosevelt Collier?
Oh, dude, I know Rosie really well.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, applying Sacred Steel to Grateful, and his story, because he came to Skull and Roses, so I was talking with him about stuff, and Bobby said they did a Merle Fest in North Carolina, the Doc Watson's late son, and the festival's named after. And this guy jumps up and sits in on him. He doesn't know who he is. Weird.
I know Rosie. He doesn't know. Well, he didn't know who Weir was.
In the church. I mean, he just didn't. And he knew. I guess he knew Sugar Reed because he knew one song, one Grateful Dead song. And now he's such a brilliant player.
His band. He was in a band called the Lee Boys. I used to tour with my solo band, the Peacemakers. Uh-huh. We played together a bunch, and yeah, he's great. You know, what you said earlier, though, reminded me of this time about them playing stadiums. I was in the stadium with Dead and Company, and I would always hang in Bill Kreutzmann's little pipe and drape. Yeah. They set up like a dressing room on stage, and he's looking out over this enormous crowd, These are the biggest, surpassed even Allman Brothers. Like, we never played stadiums. Yeah. And he looks at me and goes, "Isn't this amazing? Like, I can't believe this." And I was like, "You've been playing stadiums since I was like..."
Before stadiums.
Yeah, 6 years old. Like, really? But he still was blown away by it. And I thought that is so cool, man. Like, yeah. I wish that so many people could have shared that moment with me, with him. It was really honest,
And very healthy. Just as we go, it didn't have to be this way. We could have ended up in county fairs or stopped, playing because it didn't feel right. But to have that kind of draw 50 years after they said, okay, Duke Ellington kept up his sales standards.
Yeah.
I don't know how many musicians after 50 years, Sinatra, but I mean
the Stones.
Yeah, Paul McCartney.
Yeah. And McCartney.
That's a short list.
Yeah, there's a handful, but still, but the Grateful Dead it's something so different. It really is. And it's just
when you can get into a stadium and play something that is essentially like a Miles ballad, like Dark Star or Birdsong or something, for a long time. There's no rush, and everybody's keyed in on every note. The first time that happened, I was like, "Man, this is some other shit right here." Like,
yeah, totally.
I don't care what anybody says. Like, to be able to get away with that, like
that's
a 20,
success right
30
there.
minute. Yeah, I was just like, who? That's as much a compliment to the crowd as the band. Like, who can do that?
Yeah,
well, it's a really weird, interesting community, and weird is, of course, a very positive adjective in the world of Grateful Dead. I got to tell you, when I first heard that Dead and Company would have you, I will confess, all I knew about you at that moment was Allman's, and so I just assumed, my bad, that you were a fairly straight ahead conventional bass player.
You didn't know about Colonel Bruce Hampton, huh?
I didn't know about it, Yeah, no. And then somebody said, no. And really early on, they went, no. You should look him up. And then when of course, and then, but I still have that sort of residual assumptions. And then I went to see Dead Company for the first time, and it was like, oh no, I can see why they picked him. He's weirder than Phil.
Wow, now that
is a compliment.
Is officially, you're going to make me tear up. I always do it. That's officially the greatest compliment I've ever gotten on my bass playing. So thank you for that, Mr. McNally.
It's true. There's space and room and flexibility.
Because I aspire to that, but I can't do it. Like, Phil is the one guy that just totally stumps me. Like, I could imitate a lot of people. I can't necessarily get their tone or whatever, but he's just like a cloud. Like, you grab it and it's gone, or it just like, and to me, he's the weirdest and like the king And I say that again in a very
Oh,
good
yeah,
sense, you know,
yeah.
in the highest possible sense. So thank you for that, because that's what I do is I just think about Colonel Bruce and Sun Ra and Ornette Coleman, and just like, if it happens, just let it happen, man. Just go, you know.
That was one of the great, really moments of my life. Was watching Ornette Coleman sit in with the Grateful Dead.
Oh,
That
my
connected
God.
uh,
yeah.
fans of American music.
Absolutely. American music of all. Geez.
Dylan put out a statement when Jerry died, and it was. I may have this partly wrong. I know he mentioned Ornette, and I think it was Doc Watson. But anyway, where he said that Jerry was the only musician he knew of that spanned all of American music, from Ornette Coleman to Doc Watson, say, and you know, and loved it all, you know, and with the magic sauce of improvisation, you could absorb it all, you could connect it all, and that's I mean, to me, that's why the Grateful Dead is a phenomenon, and the music that is the same. And what I discovered, you know, is after Fare Thee Well, rather than being stuck on the band, those guys as individuals, that had said, no, well, we're stuck on the music, and so they have been.
It's the spirit. It's like the intention of it.
Yeah, it's like what Mickey said when Mickey was on the podcast. He said he's never felt anything like those 3 nights in Chicago. You know, I mean, and it was, and as someone who can't get enough Grateful Dead knowledge, and you know, whether if I'm not listening to the music, I'm listening to, you know, interviews and audiobooks. Can't thank you enough, Dennis, for everything that you've given us, as far as, you know, there's a family upon the family, you know, like, you know, yourself, David Gans, you know, I mean, Lemieux, I mean, everybody, Dick, the whole caravan of creative people that gave all of us so much of what we wanted. And there's not enough thank yous that can ever, you know, really, honestly, thank you so much.
Oh, you're entirely welcome. And my stock reply, and I get a fair amount of people just that are strangers and march up and shake my hand and say, thank you for what you do. And people sort of have looked at me and said, well, you know, that's fairly amazing. And I said, no, you know, I think I understand the spirit in which it is. And my standard reply is simply, you're welcome. I mean, I had fun. I mean, you know, I chose this, and then I got chosen, and I got real lucky, and got what I wanted to do, was to have that opportunity to apply my craft as a historian to what is an amazing story. And as I say, when I published in 2002, it never occurred to me that that it was continue to grow and continue to expand and go, you know, a completely just beyond anything I ever dreamed of. But I can live with that. I'm for it.
And you know, you have to come back on so I can ask you 10 of the 50,000 questions I have about Jerry Garcia. As always, Oteil, right? Like I have an idea of where this may go, and it always goes somewhere better.
I'd be happy to. And I you know, I get it. You know, I get those questions a lot. And you know, he was, in addition to being really, really smart, which he was, but like, you know, Phil Lesh is academically wise, at least as smart. I mean, Phil's brilliant. But what Jerry had was what they call EQ, which is emotional intelligence. His ability to relate to people, to be curious about people, you get that in Jerry on Jerry. Is off the charts, and to the point of making me crazy sometimes, because we organize an interview, and instead of promoting the product, because as Otil perfectly well knows, 95% of all rock and roll interviews are
selling
advertising sessions. There's selling either a ticket or a book or a record or whatever.
Right.
That's sort of the purpose. Jerry refused. I mean, he was there to have a conversation, and if it happened to touch on that piece of music, fine. But if it didn't, he didn't care.
Yeah.
And we did this big Rolling Stone cover, and there was some side project he'd done that was sort of my excuse for bothering him, and there was nothing. There was like one paragraph in a big long article about this side project, and I called the editor. I was just ready to just scream, and before I could get a word out, he said, "I know he didn't talk about it. I tried to get him to talk about it. He wanted to talk about his daughter, who was like 3, and he was fascinated with the way she was learning things." I went, "Oh God, he's probably telling the truth. I can't yell. Oh poop." So,
it'll sell
that's Jerry.
Anyway. That's
why people wanted to talk with him, because it was genuine. He was curious about who you were.
Yeah.
He was not all that impressed with himself. Anyway,
that's what makes him beautiful in my eyes.
Yeah, we'll take that up another time.
Yes, thank you so much.
Bless you, man.
Thank you, everyone, for
Bless
listening.
You.
And yeah,
seriously, thank you for doing what you do. And bring your friends out to Skull and Roses in April, a year from now.
I know. I thought they were going to do it again, and then they postponed it again. But I'm really looking forward to that, because I miss Melvin Seals, man.
Oh no, Melvin's. Did you ever hear him tell the stories of the day he auditioned for Jerry?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He told it on the podcast. It's the funniest thing ever.
It's because it's such a perfect story, you can't not tell it. And he just came to play, and that's why he stuck with Jerry till the day Jerry died. So
But you were talking about Brent. It made me think about that because Jerry shielded all that drug use from Melvin. He got him his own dressing room so Melvin wouldn't see them doing all that. And I was like, wow. He just was like, you can't.
No, well, anyway.
Next time. Part 2.
That's for part 2.
Bless you,
Thank you, Dennis,
Thank
so
you
much.
man.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.